save those for Paul. But we've been meeting on and off for a couple of years now. I think we've been taking some interesting steps to create synergy among our different park organizations and different parks, all of which are connected by some pretty nice leafy neighborhood streets here on the east side. I think we've been taking baby steps toward realizing Glenn Lewis's vision for a green belt on the east side, and he's offered invaluable guidance over these years. I think he's pleased with what's going on over here. And without further ado, here's Paul.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm with Morningside Trails, but to tell you the truth, each of us is with the others too. We're a park meeting. Well, I haven't been enough learning the park, I guess. I'll start on you guys anytime. But at any rate, we all work together, and that's kind of what magic is about. You notice when you came in, you were handed a little thing that said there's a magic in this place. I'd like to tell you where that came about, because it has a lot to do with today's theme. There's magic in this place. It came about when I was working with what we call our steering committee that gives us directions and gives people like Rebecca who tell me how to do things like go for grants and things like that. And one of the members is an entrepreneur, a local entrepreneur, and I said, you know, Bruce, I want to say these trails are first and innovative. And he goes, oh, no. And I said, why? They are. He goes, yeah, they may be, but here's the thing. Everybody says first and innovative. I said, oh, come on. So he brings out a friend of his and he said, Patrick, what do you think of the term first and innovative? Patrick looks at me and he goes, so I said, okay, then what do I get? What do I do? He goes, I have no idea, but you'll know it when you hear it. The next day I was out driving around an old retired professor from Syracuse University whose girlfriend happens to be on one of my trails around here. And he's not able to walk. He's quite elderly. So I said, well, let's take a drive and I'll talk to you about it. So as we're driving around, I'm telling him some of the stories. And all of a sudden he gets into it and he starts telling me some of his stories. And one thing leads to another. And before you know it, he turns to me and he goes, you know, Paul, there's a magic in this place. I said, you know, there really is. The next day, I was out running around one of the trails, and it goes around Retention Pond, which is really lovely. Anybody who lives here knows about the Retention Pond. And it's about a 1 mile loop. I'm going around the loop. I come around the bend, and a deer comes up. And usually the deer will scoot off into the woods. This deer runs alongside, which I thought was kind of neat. And as we're running along, all of a sudden I look to my left, and there's a heron. And the heron picks up, and he starts flying next to me. And for not long, maybe 10 seconds, we were all going together. And it was the day after I talked to the professor, and I said, you know what? There really is a magic in this place. And where that really comes to life is in the fact that these are community-driven. And where that comes about is that when we first started them about 10 years ago, the Ed Smith PTO went to SUNY ESF and said, will you rebuild the nature trail that was built in the 70s? And the president then, Neil Murphy, said, sure, we'd love to, but let me give you somebody to go out and check it out. So we went out and we walked around, and she said, yeah, we'd like to do this, but I have a question for you. We're ESF, you're Ed Smith PTO, neither of us own the land. How did we do this to begin with? So I started laughing. I said, I don't know, but I'll find out. I suspect it's Parks property, which it mostly is, or was at that time until it got bigger. So she goes, well, we need to include Oakwood Cemetery and the parks and all the neighborhood groups because somebody might have a problem with us doing this. And I'm looking at her and I'm groaning because I'm sure the minute we get everybody involved, there's going to be issues of liability. So we get together over coffee and bagels, and instead of that, people start coming up with new ideas. Why do you want a quarter-mile nature trail? We need some place to run. Look at the history in the cemetery. This place has history. Look at the arts. There's arts everywhere. So before you knew it, before the meeting was done, we had a 5-mile loop that included art, architecture, literature, history, science, nature, recreation, fitness, and that's indeed what it is. We're now up to 11 trails, and you'll see some of them around. There's a ghost trail that was put together by students. And they came up, I said, you need to have 13, and they came up with 20. They documented them. I can't say they're real ghosts, but they claim they are. And we now have a ghost trail, and we take people out on a walk on, and ESF even hired a paranormalist to come in and see if he could find ghosts. Do you think he did? He sure did. But that's another story, and I'm going on too long, so I'm going to now introduce Maren. Maren King.
Well, that wasn't long enough, Paul.
Oh, it wasn't? Oh, sorry. Oh, I can go on. Go back. That's why we have a magic look. because of those kinds of things coming together.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming today. My name is Lauren King, and I am a faculty member in landscape architecture at SUNY ESF. And this speaker series started in early 2016 with a conversation I was having with Glenn Lewis. You can see that Glenn seems to be the common denominator in all of this. And I've been working with our students in landscape architecture in community design studios, with community members working on different projects throughout the city and in other areas of upstate New York. And our students were learning a lot from those presentations or the work that they were doing, and community members who were working with us in participatory projects were also learning. But what we had discovered over a number of years was that those were short connections. And so community might work on a vision plan and then maybe not work together on planning or projects ever again. And so they were never able to kind of build those skills. And so the purpose of the Visioning Voices speaker series is to actually have community members who are part of neighborhoods and really want to work on projects together learn more about the importance of design and the quality of the environment in their everyday lives, places where they work, the places where they live, the places where they interact with each other, and really how the quality of those places really affects our quality of life. And so as part of our speaker series, we have a series of events where people hear from an expert from outside of our community and their experience. We have a tour. We have a workshop where people can actually then start to apply what they've learned. And another important aspect of this is that people come together from different neighborhoods. So we have a lot of different neighborhoods around the city, and they may not know each other. They may not have ever been to the other neighborhoods. So each speaker event is hosted by a different neighborhood. And in this case, it's the Eastside, and Paul and Rebecca and Matt and other people in the neighborhood have been helpful in figuring out this event. And so before I introduce our speaker, I want to say that we are looking for new members for our advisory committee. We have several members here now. If you could raise your hand, members of our advisory committee. And Elena, also a graduate student who is a member while she's still a graduate student and helping us out. But if you're interested, come see me or one of the other advisory committee members. What we'd like to be able to do, and teams, would be great to have as members. We'd like to have a member from every neighborhood in the city. So enough about Visioning Voices. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, and that's Rick Manning. And Rick lives and works in Ithaca. And in my conversations with him, we spoke a fair amount yesterday and spent some time together. He really cares deeply about the place he lives and how actually he can be part of positive change. So it's really part of professionally and personally, he really is invested in his community. And after I talked with him last night, I kind of wrote a few notes, and I want to read them because I really feel that he's achieved a magical ability to combine his passion and his interests with how he makes his living. So he's both practicing his profession as well as engaging in his community. And he's used his professional expertise to accomplish planning and design of trails and park projects while guiding others in his community to contribute their time and talents to ensure that those projects are accomplished. He received his MLA from Cornell, so Master of Landscape Architecture from Cornell, and he worked for 13 years in the Ithaca landscape architecture firm of Turbridge and Wolfe before starting his own practice in 2000. And his practice focused on providing design and implementation services for trails and parks projects across New York State. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And Glenn Lewis, Glenn, really, you are like becoming famous here, who is the planner for the Syracuse Parks Department and a founding member of Visioning Voices, brought Rick to our attention in part because of his ability to accomplish projects and enlist others to help get them done. So he's currently the Executive Director of Friends of Stewart Park and Coordinator of Cayuga Waterfront Trail Initiative in Ithaca. So welcome, Rick.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I really just want to be Glenn in my career, that's all. So I'm happy to be around to see his great influence in Ithaca. I've sort of approached what I'm doing from a consulting kind of point of view, and I was always envious of my clients who kind of worked in a place and were able to be involved in that place over time. So I've kind of made my way through Ithaca by sort of combining those two models, I guess, of consulting and having that kind of independence with having a real commitment to my community. So Ithaca, we're very fortunate in Ithaca to have a lot of parks on the waterfront. I'll talk a little bit about the history, but Stewart Park is up right up in here. Golf course, which is in 1935. This is 1921 beginning. Cass Park, Treman Marina, and then this is a primarily private section. So we're very fortunate. About 75% of the land at the southern end of Cayuga Lake and around the Cayuga Inlet, which is part of the barge canal, the Erie Canal ends right here, is in public ownership. So in a way, what we've done is easier than in some communities, but it's still proven to be surprisingly challenging. And I got carried away with my alliteration here. Somehow it seemed to work. I'll get into a lot of the P's that have inspired us. But after I graduated from University of Rhode Island when I was much younger, I moved to Austin, Texas, totally by accident. I was in search of Willie Nelson, and I found him. But I also found this amazing trail there, the Town Lake Trail. Any of you have been to Austin and seen the wonderful trail in Zilker Park? And I had a lot more time back then. I got involved in community gardening. I was there for 4 years, and I didn't really, I don't know, it somehow planted a seed in me that this was a big part of my life, both from a kind of an active living point of view. People work out a lot on the trail, but also scenically. Lady Bird Johnson and the Wildflower Research Center did a lot of work down there and just planting native plants and all throughout the highways, but it also in city parks. And Town Lake was an important part of the city. And it really still is kind of the heart and soul of Austin in a lot of ways, other than, I guess, the music and the tacos and the margaritas. But I did, after I came back to the Northeast, went to Cornell, got a job with one of my professors, Peter Trowbridge, and one of the projects that we worked on was the Tompkins County Waterfront Plan. For those of you that have been planning for a while know that this is in the era when the canal was becoming a recreation way in the early 90s, and communities were kind of figuring out how to access funding. So a lot of agencies got together to kind of form a plan for what to do with our waterfront, which really had been neglected for many years. The idea for the waterfront trail was kind of formed in this plan, but that was in 93, 94. Nothing seemed to happen. I continued to work for Trowbridge & Wolfe. One of the projects that I worked on, I worked with a consultant, the Bike Federation of America, who said I need to go to Canada and basically to look at two trails, the Lachine Canal Trail in Montreal and the Petite Train du Nord, which is a rail trail conversion up in the Laurentian Mountains. And it's an old rail trail that connected Montreal to the ski areas. It was a beautifully, kind of a tourist train, so it tied into a lot of the beautiful train stations that were tucked right into the villages. It wasn't industrial, it was sort of a beautifully designed, even rail network. So I was really impressed by the detailing and the kind of, I guess, public investment. I think you find a lot more of that in Canada and in Europe than you do in the States, although that perhaps has started to change. But this was the main trailhead in St. Jerome, which I thought was quite beautiful. The printed materials are very inspiring. So I think one thing that Paul talked about is that there's this magic. I find trails and parks are kind of what inspired me. And in a lot of ways, there's really no original thinking. I mean, you designers know that a lot of what we do is kind of borrowing, getting inspired, seeking inspiration. So I hope a lot of what I'm going to show you some of the ideas that inspired what I've done and what Ithaca Ithacans have come together to do in Ithaca. And some of it's not original, some of it's just borrowing good ideas or ideas that inspire us and kind of transforming them. It's kind of like, I guess, like music and learning to play jazz or bluegrass solos. You kind of don't steal it directly, but you might, but you also just get inspired and kind of make it your own. But I thought the signage was amazing, and just the kind of, this is that plaza from the other area, an old train conversion with this beautiful plaza that showed the whole river and how it went through the whole 200-kilometer trail. We've gone back we still go back. Last year we did the whole 200K trail and watched how it's evolved over time. Each village has their own trailheads, that have a different character, yet there's this unified feel to the whole thing through signage largely. And there is a lot of federal money and regional money involved in this, so it's, I think, maybe a little easier to do this quickly in Canada.
In Canada?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. What was the name of that trail?
The Petit Train du Nord.
So did they adapt a rail bed?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so it's a 200K trail that went from right into Montreal through Saint Jerome up to Mont Tremblant and further to the north. Like I said, a lot of the train stations, they're beautiful and they've been restored into bars and visitor information and history museums and bike parking and restaurants and just very impressive, friendly, fun places to hang out. Montreal, a big federal initiative, and it's a national park, is to restore the Lachine Canal. I have a lot of pictures, but I'm not showing them today. But we've spent a lot of time up there with my family and with other families when the kids were really young, biking on this trail from the downtown historic area out to the Atwater Market. And that was always our destination. It's about a mile, which was great for 5 and 8-year-olds. An amazing market in the summertime, great patisserie, bakery, great coffee. So this was kind of our destination. But along the trail, there were sculpture trails. This is my wife and son, and just a level of kind of development that I was really kind of blown away by and really inspired by. And it just made me realize that I love engineers. I don't know what I'd do without them, but I think trails can't be left only to engineers. As landscape architects, we really need to put our stamp on trails and make sure that we're designing trails like we would design a park. I mean, they're great if they're simple, but they can be better if we add layers of design enhancements to them. I was just impressed by things. I mean, I drive my family nuts. I'm stopping and looking at benches and drainage grates, and I mean, you all know this who are in this profession, but I thought that these are custom designed furnishings that were, sort of nouveau-ish looking, Art Nouveau, and I just was so inspired by the lighting and the use of these sort of industrial materials, but in a way that was just unique and special to this area. So I kept trying to go out on my own and get a grant. It never quite worked, but finally I just gave my notice and was able pretty quickly to get a job from the Park Foundation. Some of you might have heard of them, but we're very fortunate in Ithaca to have the Park Foundation. They fund a lot of local sustainability work, and they gave us a substantial grant to go under the Tompkins County Chamber of Commerce Foundation. So I was basically a consultant to them for what we thought was going to be 5 years, and ended up being 15 years. I'm still kind of doing it, but I'll explain where that's all going. But we got a grant to really do the kind of design thinking, planning, and fundraising. We pretty quickly put together a grant and got funded to do the first phase. This is a state EPF grant for, I think it was $250,000 at the time, and we built phase 1, which is in Cass Park. It was all publicly owned. It was kind of the easiest section to do. Part of it was already there, but we had to widen it and update it. We developed logos, and that led to a lot of other design thinking. We had this section we removed a lot of parking, put in this kind of curvy trail section. We were able to put in a couple of benches. We use old curbstones. They look a little cemetery-like, but anyway, this is what we do. And did some planting, some benches, a little stone dust pathway, and it's a nice enhancement to the trail, I think, in a beautiful scenic spot that overlooks the inlet. You can see how I kind of stole the sign from the Petite Train du Nord pretty much directly and created a welcome sign, which is what bienvenue means, I believe. So participation is really important, and that's why you're all here. The trail starts here. It was kind of an early idea, but this is very early in the process where we just need people's help. And what we were trying to get people's help to do was to build trailheads and donate stepping stones. So this is the first trailhead that we built in Cass Park. A lot of people came out. A lot of the Chamber Commerce community came out to this, and people that, and certainly the bike community and donors. This is our stepping stone program. We have these are $500, $250, $100. So these are keystones, cornerstones, rolling stones, and we're going to up the price a little bit because they don't generate a lot of funding anymore, but done in a kind of, we carefully thought about the design pattern. This is the first one we did in Cass Park, but then we sort of expanded it at the farmers market and other areas. This is some wise friends of mine who donated this particular trail. We did milestones that were funded by the Tompkins Trust Company. They gave us $4,000 to put 8 up every quarter of a mile. End-to-enders is something that we still try to make go, but any of you know what an end-to-ender is in the hiking world? It's basically like we've gone down the whole Appalachian Trail. So people that have donated a stepping stone at all 5 trailheads are an end-to-ender, and they're acknowledged at the Visitor Center trailhead on this. Interestingly, I got this design. We worked a lot with Corten steel and stainless, but I was in New York City and I saw a Chipotle that kind of looked like this. It had kind of Corten steel and stainless steel, and that's kind of where that idea came from. My vet donated this dog care station for a couple $1,000. This is Carolyn Peterson, Carolyn McMaster, I'm sorry, and so it kind of hides the mutt bit behind this dog. We had a little more money back then. We probably wouldn't do this now, but it's a fun little enhancement to the trail. Doug Levine, who now directs the State Theater, met with Hillary to try to see if we could get some funding back in like 2006 when she was a state senator for New York State. Didn't really work at the time. We tried. So like I said, we thought a lot about design. This is our first kiosk at Cass Park. That was an expensive one. We don't do those anymore. It was 2 pieces of Corten steel. And we picked up on the idea of this kind of the swoosh in the logo. You can see the waterfront, and kind of ran with it. You might argue too far, but I'll leave that up to you designers to critique. But this kiosk kind of waves in that way, and it waves sort of vertically as well. It's kind of a fun design. The bike racks have this swoosh in it. The arch bridge in Cass Park. The benches are custom benches that were made by Tristan. So we kind of customized them in a way, and they're really solid, great, but they're attractive. People pay now $5,000 to sponsor them, and it's an important trail fundraiser. And we got a nice award back in the day when the Rail to Trail Conservancy did those awards. So one thing that makes trail projects, not all of them, but some of them, very interesting is history. And I know you're very tuned into this and have a lot of interesting historic resources in your community and neighborhoods. I'm not going to get into the waterfront history too much. I'll talk a little more about Stewart Park, but I mean, there's a history of rowing. There's a lot of steamboats. There's the Erie Canal history. It's all kind of comes together in this waterfront place, and rowing is still a really big part of the kind of vibe of the inlet and the flood channel and of the waterfront trail, I think. But researching it right early on, one of the first things we did was to do a historic survey. I hired a friend of mine and worked on it a lot myself, and then developed at every kiosk at all 5 trailheads, we have a map on one side and we have an interpretive panel on the other side. And they have different colors, but they essentially all look like this with very detailed history. A lot of people who do interpretive science look at this and think it's way too dense, but we just assume that people will at least look at the pictures. Some people read them, some people just read the upper part, which we sort of have grown to exaggerate a little more in text size. Creating brochures. I mean, now brochures are a little outdated, I think. There's a pocket sites that we're starting to use that is more of a phone-based system for kind of interpreting trails. We did get a grant from the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor to do an interpretive sign that told a story that just not everyone understands, that Ithaca is the southern gateway, or one of the southern gateways to the Erie Canal. And this is right in the heart of the inlet in the West End area, which is right down there. So, so this is kind of the overall layout of the trail. Phase 1 that I talked about is here. Very quickly, we got a grant to do phase 2. A year later, we got about $450,000 to do phase 2. And we've always speak, when we spoke about the trail, as being something that will be great, that we're really trying to make it exceptional, not only for residents, but for tourists. Tourism funding has been really important to us, which is the room tax funds that people pay when they come to visit your community. I don't know, I suspect you have a program like that here that funds maybe tourism events and tourism infrastructure, but we've taken advantage of the tourism infrastructure funding to do a lot of things. So we thought this was a slam dunk. A lot of the landowners signed on, Cornell University signed on, at least in concept, and some of the private landowners, but then we actually got the money, which I think they were shocked at, and then started to really map the right-of-way and started the acquisition process. And then it kind of all went south, as we say, up north. And we just had so this was in probably 2005. And the landowners organized against us, and we had about 5 years of really intense drama where the mayor would come back. It was sort of an opinion page fight that used to take place back in the old days. I suppose it still does. I don't think it resonates as much now. But and then the landowners came back a month or two later, and then another supportive business person kind of put their take on it. And then the fire board, we wanted to narrow an area crossing. I'll show you the bridge that we created, and the fire board came down against that because it would limit the size of. And then the mayor came back to fight again. So, it was an interesting moment that was actually very depressing and kind of shocking to me. Though I've learned that, and those of you that have done this, Glenn, this is the world that he lives in, I'm sure, part of the time. And it's very hopeful when things happen. It just takes a long time. So what do you do when you're kind of waiting, I guess, is what this little section is about. So what we did was we really focused on little improvements on existing sections of the trail. And this is one. We got a little grant to do a birding kiosk with 4 signs that kind of spun around and talked about migrating birds, residents, that are permanent, ones that come up just for the summertime, and then a panel on migration patterns, which is very fascinating. And then we built this garden, and we did this in a day. We had a big truck come and help us, which I don't show you, and we ended up with this, basically it's a bird-friendly planting garden around, this is when it looked the best. Obviously what I'm showing you is enhanced reality. Sometimes it's not as good, but it looked really good at the time, and it's something that we now work to maintain, and I'll get into that in a little bit. That's a real challenge for all of us.
See the swoosh there in your
We do, yes.
timber there.
Yeah. Might be a bit over the top, but we go for it. So this is we started to do trailheads where there was no trail because they made sense. One of them, there was a walk on Inlet Island, so we just created this entry to it. This is our new kiosk model, which is a little more simple. Actually based more on that Montreal light that you saw with an I-beam, and then a stainless steel swoosh and a Corten steel swoosh. And this is a temporary panel, but the interpretive panel on the back side that everyone's facing, and then a trail map on the front side. Farmers market, there was no trail there, but the trailhead really helped the market. It was a nice area that wasn't developed, a little hand sketch that we got a grant then to build, and the ribbon cutting. This is the chamber president, Gene McFeeters, or former chamber president. And then this is what it looks like. This is still a beautiful spot, shady spot at the market with the curbstone and the donors. It was funded by the Triad Foundation, which was a break-off from the Park Foundation, and a couple of private donors as well. And then the stepping stone donors, all the people that have, and that's, the market is, there's a lot of stones there, a lot still available, so we're constantly putting in new stones every year. We developed this water music idea. I play music and I like music a lot, so we have people, and we're starting to do this again. We did it last year and last 2 years, and we're doing it in July. If you want to come down, I'll let Glenn know about it, and Marin. But it's a really fun thing where people play, 2 kayakers. Now we do it in Stewart Park, but it's basically playing to trail users and to kayakers. And it's kind of a wacky idea, but it's really fun, and people enjoy it a lot. Finally, so I'm not going to get into this section, but so the phase 2 is where we had all of the property acquisition drama. So we decided to just skip it and do phase 3 before phase 2. And so we started that in 2010. We did get a $950,000 earmark from I think it was T21 at the time, to build this section of the trail. And I'm not going to show you that right now. I'll show a couple of images later, but it was completed it ended at the Chamber of Commerce, which is also the Visitor Center, which is also the nonprofit sponsor. And this was funded, this trailhead was funded by Tompkins Trust Company, who's been a big supporter and still remains a big supporter of the trail and of the Stewart Park now. So anyway, phase 2 kind of is that section. It's just 1.5 miles, and this took us, well, probably 13 years to actually implement it. It goes through the Cornell boathouses and the Ithaca College boathouses. And Cornell was a quiet, they're the Chamber's biggest member, so the Chamber couldn't ever call them out, but they fought it vigorously at every moment because they just thought the site was too tight, and Cornell is a big player in Ithaca. So that was an interesting and very surprising phenomenon for us, because they were on our advisory board, and it's a big organization, and some of them really liked us. But athletics was, and I'm sure Syracuse athletics has more power than Cornell athletics, and it's kind of a world unto itself. So that was an interesting kind of strategy to kind of get through that. So just some simulations. So basically we had the situation where there were 2 lanes in the westbound direction, and one of them was a right-hand turning lane to a dead end. We don't know quite why DOT did that, but it was an opportunity to take some of it. So this is a simulation of the barrier. This is the idea that we had at the time, which was to have the sidewalk stay and have a two-way trail. It's not what actually happened. What happened is this, where we just put in some less attractive jersey barriers with a rail on top, doubled the width of the sidewalk, and kind of ended up with this. And I guess Marin had said it's something like you're going on.
The Sidewalk Boulevard issue, I thought that we could look at solutions for that, and maybe you're already doing that, but that's pretty far, yeah.
Yeah,
They expanded the sidewalk.
So what we did was we took one 14-foot lane, we took 7 feet of it. The outside edge of this is 7 feet. Then we were able to add bike lanes on the outside, because you do want to make sure you maintain bike traffic and they don't have to cross the street to get on the trail and then cross back. So we were able to add, actually not technically bike lanes, but 4-foot shoulders on either side with 11-foot lanes, and then this 2-way trail, and the old curb was kind of like the de facto center line. So it works well. It's way cheaper than a new bridge, for sure. Going around, kind of circling around some private property. This is kind of a simulation of what we thought it might look like. That's what actually was built. This is a little further north. This is the existing condition, a simulation that we kind of used to communicate the idea, and then that's what was actually built. Going around the Cornell boathouses, which, as I said, was very challenging politically, but now it's a huge, I think, a huge enhancement to the rowing program, because all of their visitors can get out and watch the races on the trail. It's a great, like this is, the whole rowing course is out here. The athletes use the trail all the time for workouts, and this is a simulation. This is on the outside edge of what is a DOT maintenance facility, and this is sort of a simulation that got a little skewed, and then this is what was built. This is just south of the farmer's market, if any of you have been to the farmer's market in Ithaca. And, it was kind of never open to the public, and it's been a huge kind of revelation to people. Just the scenery is so beautiful, and the finish line for the Cornell rowing course is right here. So it's been a wonderful addition, and it took so long to do. It's just, I mean, those of us that, I mean, I did a plan with this Peter Trowbridge in 1995, and this wasn't done until 2015. So it was very painful to wait that long, frankly, but it's done, and it's certainly worth it. This is an overlook right in that area at the southwest corner, overlooking the inlet and the rowing course. This was also we call it the Crew Cove Overlook, and it was sponsored by a private donor. So there's a little stone dust loop coming off of the trail, a couple of benches on bench paths. Oh, it's a little out of place. So what to do to maintain these things? So when we get private funding to do a special area, the city doesn't necessarily, actually, they don't take these over and take care of them. They don't have the staff to do it. So we are developing a trail adopter program, and it can be very successful, or it can be less successful, I guess. This is Trowbridge, Wolf, and Michaels, who, as I said, is now in the office above me. They've adopted the Inlet Island Trailhead, and they're great. We're going out next Friday to clean up the trail. They have sort of this Beer 30 party every Friday afternoon, so I'm able to grab some of them from that, give them beer, and they maintain it really fast in about an hour. They like expensive beer, but that's okay. My best adopters is the Ithaca Dragon Boat Club. Do you have dragon boaters up here? No. It's sort of the Cornell Asian Society, and it's a big phenomenon throughout the country. Philadelphia, New York, Toronto. Ithaca has a smaller club, but they're very successful, and they're just really intense, mostly adults, some with Cornell affiliation, some not, who just really get after it on volunteer work days, and they're really great to work with. So basically now this is what we have in Ithaca. We have a 5.5 mile trail. This section up here, which was really almost just somewhat of an afterthought, just a suggestion to the state that they should build a trail out in Tremont Marina. They're actually doing that now. This summer it should be done by the end of June, which is really exciting, because then we'll be able to get out to the south end. There'll actually be a trail that comes all the way around the Hog's Hole, and so it'll be asphalt for part of it, and sort of branded like the waterfront trail. It will have our kiosks, it will have our benches, the same design standards, and then there'll be a stone dust nature trail also around the meadow here. And that'll take you also to the lake, so you'll have a similar view as you have in Stewart Park. And then the state also just recently, I don't have images of it for you today, but recently completed the Black Diamond Trail. So you can get from the waterfront trail now to Upper Teganic. I don't know if any of you have seen Teganic Falls. It's really beautiful. One of our amazing waterfall state parks. It's up in Trumansburg, so it's about an 8-mile trail. We're now working on plans to do a trailhead because it's not well marked at the moment. I just want to skip now to a little bit about Stewart Park for you. So currently, so here's the waterfront area that I just showed you. This is Stewart Park. The whole Stewart Park complex is right here. So we have Fuertes Bird Sanctuary, which is a wild area, forever wild. So in that period of waiting for phase 3 to get going and phase 2, for the property issues to get sorted out, we were looking at how the trail would go through Stewart Park and really recognized that trails are much more than the trail itself. It's really about the corridor, it's about the experience, about what you see, about the neighborhood, the park, the place. And it was just evident to us and to those that really observe parks closely, that Stewart Park needed help. It was an old wood frame construction from the 1890s that has been poorly maintained lately. So we got a room tax feasibility grant to do what we called at the time the Stewart Park Rehabilitation Action Plan. Now we call it the Revitalization Plan. And it basically was kind of a strategic plan, not a master plan per se, but more of a list of prioritized projects. What are the projects? What do we think they would cost? And some we knew, some we didn't, but we just kind of laid out a process for how we might approach it. And one of the recommendations was to form a Friends organization. But a Friends organization that, I don't think it's a good name for us, for what we do, because I see us more as, I guess, a conservancy in that we're a fundraising organization. We do volunteer. Friends organizations to me implies, you're organizing volunteers, you're picking up litter, you're kind of doing maintenance and that kind of thing. So we are thinking about changes to the name and to the geographic scope of the organization. But anyway, that was a recommendation we made in 2009. We did form Friends of Stewart Park in 2011, and I'm now the executive director of that. Now we're in the process of taking over the waterfront trail from the Chamber of Commerce, because I've learned since then the donor management and how you kind of get donors, thank them, acknowledge them, keep records of their gifts is really important. And we never really did that at the chamber, because it just, I don't know, it wasn't what chambers do, but it is what nonprofits do. So we want to sort of expand the fundraising model that we have back into the waterfront trail. I do it anyway, so it just makes sense to have it be part of my job. Stewart Park it's really just this amazing site, and it has a great history that I just wanted to share with you. So we have a lot of partners. The City of Ithaca is our main partner. We've got a lot of funding from New York State that I'll tell you about. The Chamber of Commerce has been very helpful. Park Foundation. The tourism program is that room tax fund that I told you about, which has been totally critical to what we do. And others. I'll tell you about the Wharton Studio Museum and the Boat Club. So the park's history is really rooted in rowing. There's a great book called Boys in the Boat, if any of you are into competitive rowing, that if you like that, you should read it. It really gets into the whole history of not only of rowing, but then what happened at the 1936 Olympics when rowers went over to Nazi Germany. It's just a really amazing story, if you like sports. And so these races used to take place on Cayuga Lake, and they would end at Stewart Park. So in Cornell, started rowing in the 1870s and had a lot of success right away. So it was a huge event in Ithaca. There's a rail line that runs up the east side of the lake, and people would get on trains downtown, and these there'd be 4 stands, and like thousands of people would go up the lake and then follow the rowing races down to the Stewart Park. And you can see it's just this amazing phenomenon, people dressed up with their hats and watching this race. So the Cascadilla Preparatory School, which was the school that prepared kids to go to Cornell, or tried to get them to go to Cornell, they had pretty aggressive athletics programs, and one of them was rowing. So they built this incredible shingle-style boathouse in 1894 in Stewart Park. And that's what it looked like back in the day when it was still really intact. But a beautiful, beautiful structure. They went, like we all do, they went to Harvard, they went to Philadelphia to see the Boathouse Row in Philly along the Schuylkill Trail. And, they really studied other precedents and then came up with this model. And then the architects continued to work in Stewart Park, but it's, so this is the back end of the building on Fall Creek. They get out and so the rest of the park was done by the Ithaca Street Railway, which is the trolley company. Do you have a trolley park here, I wonder? A lot of communities have, so Cayuga Lake State Park was a trolley park for Seneca Falls, and Emerson Park was a trolley park for the city of Auburn. This was our trolley park, and basically trolley companies had a lot of money in the 1890s, and to stimulate off-peak ridership, they had a lot of commuters using it during the workday, but evenings and weekends in the summer, they created these destination parks. And so Stewart Park was that park, and they built a beautiful water tower, 2 shingle-style pavilions, which you can see here, band shell, and this has moved. It's what we call the Tea Pavilion, but people would kind of get out here, and the grounds are beautifully landscaped, as you can see, so the lake would be to the right. And there were huge events all summer. It was kind of the place to be in Ithaca. There were bands playing nightly in the band shell. This is a view from the water tower down to the plaza. And there were a lot of resorts on Cayuga Lake, so people would get in steamers and come down for these evening events. So it was, and there was a lot of like steamer commuting. You would take the train to Ithaca, take a steamer up to the north end of the lake, and then continue on to Niagara Falls or Buffalo or further. So these are just these epically huge steamships on these little piers. It's kind of remarkable. So pretty quickly, though, like in I guess the teens of the 20th century, the automobile kind of killed all of the trolley companies. It's kind of an intentional thing, I think, if you read about the history of it. So Stewart Park went downhill very quickly. We had the whole, a silent film company had come to shoot at Cornell, and they were kind of impressed by the landscape of Ithaca and thought it was interesting. And Stewart Park was available, so they purchased it, and they developed silent film. So just a short period between 1950 and 1920. This is a Perils of Pauline shot where they actually, this is Fall Creek on the Stewart Park Bridge where they actually threw a trolley car over. They hopefully got the shot on the first take, because you don't do this twice. And they did a lot of World War I propaganda films, so they create these little villages and blow them up. And, it's just really a fascinating history. It's one of the only studios left in the country, maybe one of 5. So they used to have this whole system where you can separate all these different areas. Because it was silent film, you could shoot multiple shots at once because there was no sound bleeding. So these are still existing. Now it's a maintenance facility, but we have a plan to interpret this, and we're working with the Case Museum in Auburn, New York, where they actually synced sound to film first, and then the Eastman Museum up to create a film trail. So I have my board chair is the executive director of the Wharton Studio Museum Project. So they decided pretty quickly that Hollywood has better weather than Ithaca, so they left after about 5 years. But the history remains, and it's pretty significant. We had a lot of big stars in Ithaca, and it's just a cool piece of history. So this was an era where public parks were really important. So the city of Ithaca and our mayor donated, he died about 3 weeks before the park was going to open. In his will, he donated $150,000 for park improvements. So in 1921, it opened as a public park. So we're kind of working towards 2021 to try to get a lot of things done in the park. This is a shot, an aerial in 1932. In a lot of ways, the park was at its peak. There were pathways there. This is a memorial flagpole garden to the Mayor Stewart Memorial Garden that we've restored. All these pathways are gone now. You can see the water tower, the band shell, the 2 pavilions. In 1934, there was a master plan done that's actually quite beautiful. Much of it was already there. Like you saw, this complex was kind of there. This is a really cool Beaux-Artsy bridge, pier with a swimming pool in it. That was never done. This tennis court is done. There were some improvements made to the Swan Pond. This is where the boathouse is. This bridge was never done, but these are the existing bridges here. They're probably different now, but they're in that location. We tried to build a bridge here, and we did the waterfront trail through the golf course, but I nearly lost my life on that idea. That was not popular with the golf community. I did learn that golfers are very passionate about the land, and they're probably more than just about anyone, they're really tied to their landscape. They know it so well. What? Okay, yeah. I've never had issues with them, but So in the 40s to the 70s, there was swimming. It was kind of an era of not great photography. I guess it was more the Polaroid era. I don't know, we don't have great pictures of it. But a lot of people that are still alive have great family memories of what they did in the park in the mostly 70s and 80s at this point, obviously. But we've done a lot of projects in Stewart Park. We built, as I told you, the Waterfront Trail Phase 3, which was built second, comes through Stewart Park, and this has really transformed the use of the park into a year-round, a whole new group of users. It's become, it's kind of changed the whole feeling and vibe of the park, I think, just to have this here. And we would like to complete the loop. We do find that, like in Cass Park, people like to walk around a park, so we'd really like to make that happen. That's one of our long-term projects. We've done new plantings at the entry. This was funded by the Ithaca Garden Club with about a $5,000 grant, maybe $2,000 actually. We've done interpretive signs. It's a really interesting history of the Bird Club involvement in saving the Renwick Wildwood I mentioned. All of the buildings now have interpretive panels. This is our young mayor, Savanti Myrick, who's been in the park a lot, just helping us out and supporting our work. So we are working now towards 2021 and the centennial. And our big initiative now is to do an inclusive playground. I guess it would be like the one you have, the Wegmans playground, where it's kind of a new model where they're much more dense and surfaced so that they're really accessible to, so that all of the, or at least most of the play structures are accessible to people who have mobility impairments, either kids or even parents, caregivers who might have able-bodied kids. You know, it's just kind of the new model that we'll be doing all the time in the future. The boathouse, we did just recently get about a $367,000 state grant to do the exterior of the boathouse, which we're very excited about. The Blue Way Trail, I noticed there's a woman from Cayuga County here, I think, planner, and this is a 3-county effort to build a Cayuga Lake Blue Way Trail, and part of that is getting built in 2 landings in Stewart Park this summer, which we're very excited about. And so I'll show you a little bit on the playground, and then we'll kind of have some time for questions. So we have a pretty aggressive playground plan. We were very fortunate that our Barbara Lifton, who's our house, she's actually the woman who I rented an apartment from her when I first moved to Ithaca, interestingly, to go to graduate school. She was a teacher at the time. She then worked for Representative Marty Luster. Then when he retired, she took over, ran, and won. She gave us $1 million, kind of a member item, it's not what you call it anymore, but to work on this playground. It turns out to be about a $2 million playground, which is stunning to all of us, but it has a lot to it. And this is what it looks like now, which is kind of like vintage 1950s odd kind of structures, and there's some new ones too that are built. So, and our splash pad that's over 50 years old, it's curbed, so it's not really accessible, and it's not really, it's, you know, it's wet, it's great, but it's not that fun compared to new ones. We're working with a Racker Center where my wife works, and really have engaged sort of a that organization and the Finger Lakes Independence Center to try to make sure that what we're doing is really truly inclusive, and I really hope that we meet their standards. We've done a lot of carousel. The carousel is part of the playground right on the edge of it, and it's a really important part of it. So we've added an accessible ramp, and we adapted one of the carriages so that it was wheelchair accessible. The door flops down, and I don't have a good picture of it right now, but this is an initiative we did a couple years ago. We put in a new fence around it. That's getting a carousel cover. Last fall, we had a community build where we had about 900 people come for 6 days. It was a muddy mess, but the phase 1 was right here. We built a community-built structure here and a community-built sand play area there. So that's kind of what it looked like at the start. Yes, last year was wet, as some of you might remember. And then it sort of started to take shape. This is the preschool play structure that has a lot of historic references to the steamboat era and the trolley era. There's the steamboat right there, a little further along. So this was a huge effort for us. It was 6 14-hour days, literally with 900 people coming. We had to feed and keep them busy. We worked with Play by Design. Some of you might have worked with them. They really know how to keep people busy and engage them. So we've sort of finished it. We're still finishing a lot of it because it was so wet and so slow to start that I'm finding that a community build is really never finished, I think. But it's very charming, one-of-a-kind structure. There's one they did in Auburn recently that's quite beautiful. Now we're doing phase 2. It's actually just out to bid now, and it will be, bid opening is on April 30th. We're hoping to start construction in June, and that would include a very large school-age play structure, this berm that will get up to about a 5-foot-high lake overlook, and the accessibility community is very excited about this. To get kids with mobility issues and in wheelchairs up to height. I mean, it's just 5 feet, but in Stewart Park, it's a very flat site, and it will tie into this structure in three different elevations. There's a splash pad, and we're kind of going to put the Finger Lakes kind of mural in there so that it kind of reflects our local region, and a new bathroom, which is very expensive, but accessible bathrooms are really important to playgrounds. New carousel cover, which about a $240,000 item, which was never in our initial budget, and it's kind of a problem for us in our fundraising, frankly. But it will be an amazing playground when it's done. And I think when we interviewed, we did a kind of a campaign feasibility study where we met about 30 private donors and had them rate and discuss a bunch of different projects with us. The museum project, the Wharton Studio Museum project, the playground, the Cascadilla Boathouse. And this was felt by most to be the critical project because the existing playground was so bad and such terrible condition. And it was just very family friendly and engaging, and the inclusive angle is something that I think resonated with everyone in the community. So some of the elements here are a new bathroom structure that sort of relates to the shingle-style architecture of the historic buildings in the park, the splash pad with some overhead features, and then this very large, highly accessible structure that is all ramped and that ties into this accessible berm as well. And then finally, so we're just doing some work on the historic core. This is kind of our final thing. When the playground is done, right in this area, we're going to shift into this. This is where the water tower was, the picnic pavilion, which is under restoration, the Wharton Studio Museum, where we want to just take the front of it and do a kind of a museum and park visitor center while retaining the maintenance function. So that the north side of that building would be a very linear kind of a space where there would be museum exhibits, a garage door, sliding doors that would open up onto the lake view, and a terrace out in front right along the waterfront trail. There's really no place in the park now where you can, well, there's no winter bathrooms. So for 6 months out of the year, you can't go to the bathroom in Stewart Park. We had a volunteer work day. We do an annual waterfront cleanup every year. We had it last Saturday, and we had about 75 people in Stewart Park, and no one could go to the bathroom, which we kind of forget this, but it's kind of shocking and silly. So we're trying to address that in our playground. So that's what I wanted to share with you, and I guess I know it was a lot of images, but I hope I've communicated that it's really worthwhile work that you're all doing. It's very possible. It will probably take, and many of you know this, longer than you think. But I think it's really important to know your place really well, and to just understand the history, to understand the context, to document that, to use it, to see how other communities have done, find examples that inspire you where they've done a really good job. I think we've done some really good things in Ithaca. If you came, I could show you all the things that I don't dare put into a PowerPoint show where it didn't really work that well. And my wife and I visited Austin last year, and in April, and we spent a lot of time on running on the waterfront trail and biking, and then going to Zilker Park and hanging out by Barton Springs. And I saw so many things there that if they were on my trail, they would have like bummed me out totally, like just details that were not right. But it didn't bother me at all. There were just little things that, there's imperfections, but really the important thing is that the big linkages and the big concepts are completed and done, and that you've highlighted the best features of your place, I think. And I think this community has done a really good job of, like the Creek Walk is a really big, important, significant project. And I would imagine that along that, and I think there are elements along it, and I'm sure it's been thought of, where there are special places along it that have been highlighted and incorporated into the plans, but sometimes there's just not enough money with despite the large amounts of public funding to do all those little things. So if the community has the interest and the capacity to kind of identify those, design them, fundraise for them, and then maintain them, there's a whole other layer of opportunity there that I think that we've tried to take on in Ithaca, and it's generally been very positive, and I think we're very committed to making it work. It requires an ongoing effort in really building your community kind of support for it, but it's something that I think is really worth doing if you want the trail to be more than just a transportation or recreation way, but to be something that people are really proud of, that tourists want to come and see, that's really truly special, and that reflects the kind of, I guess, the real value of that place. So thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Come on, Glenn.
You've been working on this all told.
Well, that waterfront plan I showed was 1993, finished in 1995. I started, then there was a 5-year period where I just kept working, but nothing happened, so I just got frustrated and decided that I wanted to try to make that happen professionally. So since 2000 is when I approached the Chamber of Commerce. We got a grant towards the end of 2000, and that's really when the effort started. So it's been 19 years of active work for me. Maybe it's been like half of my time. Now it's almost full time.
I wonder if you could address the question, the quandary of too much or too little hardscape. And there seems to be, particularly in urban parks, a hardscape creep. You start with a dirt trail, then a mulch trail, then a stone dust trail, then a 4-foot, 5-foot paved trail, then it's an 8-foot, then it's an 11-foot, and so the trucks and the cars. And pretty soon you're in a park, and it's great for accessibility, and I assume funders like that, but pretty soon it's like you're on a road, like one of those lanes on the bridge you showed, rather than in a more natural setting. And no matter what plantings you do, and the birches were very beautiful, there's a sense of I'm still on a hard surface.
Right.
So how are you finding those design solutions, and what are the pressures, whether they're functional or seasonal or financial, that lead you into those decisions about how much to pave, when to pave, what type of paving, that kind of thing?
Well, I think if you're getting federal transportation funding, then you're probably locked into either stone dust, like wide stone dust, maybe at least 10 feet or 12 feet, or asphalt, or maybe concrete in some areas if needed. So it sort of depends on your goal. If it's a transportation trail / active recreation trail, then I think you have to meet accessibility standards, kind of maintenance, the ability to maintain it with small vehicles anyway. So I think in the waterfront trail, that really hasn't been such an issue. I did just get an email from someone, so the Tree Marine section, the new section that I mentioned, that's now being built on the sort of the northwest portion.
The stone dust, you said.
Well, part of it is asphalt and part of it is stone dust, and there was this kind of a irate email that was sent to the Parks Commission that got sent to me by a woman who just, was just incredulous that the state would do this, to pave the trail. I mean, anything.
Trail doing it recently where people were irate because, the conflict between bikers and people with wheels versus people who walk and
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think it just depends on the character of the place. Like the waterfront trail is really intended to be, it's an urban trail. It's intended to accommodate skaters. If you want skaters, you have to do pavement. If you don't want skaters, you can get away with stone dust. But we wanted, Ithaca's like here, I guess it's a big hockey town, and I know people like to rollerblade. So I think, and to reach those high accessibility standards, you need to do asphalt. I think the whole Black Diamond Trail, that section that goes from Ithaca, from the waterfront trail in Ithaca out to, it's more like the Canalway Trail than it's stone dust.
well, now it's mostly paved. It's flat now.
Oh,
When
it's-
you work it out,
Well, a lot of this, maybe the more rural sections. Right. But I think that's just a question of if sometimes it's easier to find capital money where you do less maintenance over time than stone dust where it requires a little more ongoing maintenance, so there might be some washout problems or other issues. So I don't know, it's just knowing your community, and it's a balance, and it's sometimes a fight, where you just have to somehow figure out how to come together and do what's best.
You're always going to be privileging one group of users over another, probably.
Yeah.
Does that affect you?
Any of you have experience in that you want to share? Yeah, I think it's, I don't know, I guess it's just that for us hasn't been a big issue, and I think it's just, a lot of it truly is funding driven.
Yeah, that's what it seems.
I mean, if you get federal money or state funding would be a little more flexible, I think, but I really value living downtown urban trails and the sort of benefits of having that non-motorized but highly, easy transportation trail. And that to me serves a huge function in Ithaca. And I think it's something that it just hasn't been an issue for us. So I think when you're in more rural areas or more kind of natural areas, then you just wouldn't do that. The areas that we're talking about are not, they're urban areas, urban waterfront edge. It's sort of public, but it's not natural. It's been very manipulated. There's been a lot of dredging. So I think it's something that is defensible in our case. But, so, other questions or comments or thoughts?
You talk about your experiences with vandalism.
Yeah, we've had really remarkably little vandalism, actually. We've been very lucky with that. I don't think Ithaca has a lot of graffiti. We haven't had graffiti much, maybe a little bit on some concrete pads, bench pads, but really we've been just very fortunate with that. So I think we are a small town, so it's, I think, a little different than a bigger city. So I haven't had to worry about that a whole lot, and I'm very thankful for that. I didn't show up,
Well, I was just a lot of your stuff seems to be made out of steel, which is less attractive to vandals, whereas wood is easy to break and hammer on and stuff like that. I don't know if that addresses part of that.
Yeah, I was kind of drawn by the whole Montreal thing and the way they used steel and the durable materials. And I worked a lot with a fabricator who was sort of a metal artist, I think, a place called AccuFab. And so we've just gone to that just to as much aesthetic as anything else, and just durability. I never thought about it as far as vandalism, but I think it's been a really good choice because I think it's just easier to find money to build things than it is to maintain things. And wood kiosks, I just find that over time, kiosk design is an interesting thing. I don't know, I find a lot of the traditional hooded little kiosks, I don't know, they don't totally turn me on always, and then in 10 years, they look like they need to be replaced. So we've really tried to do something more, I guess, modern and durable and a little cleaner and simpler. So that's been the approach in Ithaca, and certainly it was inspired by a lot of what I saw in Canada, I think, for sure. Yes?
Maintenance. You mentioned some of the Friends of the Park groups.
Yeah.
And is this really an ad hoc arrangement? Are there gaps in maintenance that pose a problem that you feel you could do better with? Is everything accounted for?
Well, I guess there's a couple of different layers of it. I mean, so we've created all of these little gardens. So that has a burden of maintenance that definitely falls on us as an organization. We are trying now and having some success actually in weaving in, we have a community beautification program that is funded fully by the room tax fund. And like if you go to the Ithaca Commons, we've redone our commons recently, and it's really nice, and it was much needed, and it's quite beautiful. And the planting is very impressive. It's a huge effort, both for the community beautification program. There's a downtown Ithaca Alliance. I'm sure you have a bid here, a business improvement district. So that's what that is. And then the city DPW. So this kind of a three-pronged partnership. So we're trying to recreate that in Stewart Park, and community beautification just stepped up and provided a half-time summer person for Stewart Park, which is really important. And then, because that's kind of the flagship kind of section of the trail. The farmer's market, we have a trailhead there, but the whole market is very funky and it doesn't matter that much there. Just kind of everything seems to work there. I go there, I mean, this is not a replicable model, but I have summer students who work there and kind of blow the trailhead. All this cottonwoods are really a beautiful tree that are a nightmare next to trails. They're just dirty, and I mean, they're great, but it's a real problem. So I'm there blowing it every Friday, or in the summer I have work study students doing it. So I'm, frankly, as I get older, I'd almost rather just be a gardener than a landscape architect, because I really like the idea, just the process of maintaining things and working with people to do that. So I'm kind of trying to shift my job to more of that, because that's what's needed, because we built a lot of stuff already. So the city is stepping up. We're hoping community beautification will step up. We're trying to make our trail adopter system more robust. It's not like an agreement that is formally written yet. And we do get a pushback from people about, how can you make improvements if there's no maintenance plan for them? I mean, I hear that all the time. And I don't know. I mean, my comeback to that is that if you don't have anything that is worth maintaining, then you're not going to maintain it. If you, as a community, invest in facilities that are valued, then you will figure out how to maintain it. So that's been our approach. I think it's sort of ad hoc, but I think we're kind of building an organization, I hope, that will be up to that task of both supplementing city maintenance, but also engaging other resources like the room tax fund is something that we're really interested in. Because I see them maintaining little places all over the town, like along streetscapes, and I know the places on the waterfront trail, and if we really want this to be a tourist destination and a place that's really valued, we need to maintain it at a very high level. There's a whole other level of like maintenance, of like asphalt maintenance and more hard infrastructure that's going to fall on the city, and I think they know that. We will be there to support them and help them in fundraising, but there's that hard infrastructure layer that is something that is probably a little beyond our organization, but as far as kind of enhancing and beautifying, that's something that we really embrace and are working hard to address.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd be happy to answer questions.